So thanks very much for giving me the chance to talk. I'm supposed to then add some Norwegian perspectives to what Lucy said, covering the whole world. And I'm going to make three main points. I'm just going to see if I can flip the screen. Yeah, three main points here. The first one is that the loss of nature requires an increased focus on restoration. And I think in Norway, we have tended to forget about that, that we sort of are the land of plenty in terms of nature. We need to rethink that perspective. The second point I want to make is that investments in nature is equally important to mitigating climate change. And policies and public resources should reflect that. And I think that's not the case in Norway at the moment, though we are shifting towards more interest in protection of nature. And the third one, which I think Lucy has explained very well for the global situation, is that economic methods are very important to make the case for increased restoration. And I'm just going to end with some examples from Norway. Let's see. Yeah, this map is quite familiar to Norwegians. It shows the decline in nature with wilderness-like qualities in the last 120 years. And it's basically nature that is located more than 5 kilometers from significant technical installations, so roads, power lines, etc. And that has been reduced from about 50% to 11.5% over the last 120 years. And in the southern parts of Norway, we are actually below 5%. You know, even if this is a relatively simple indicator, it shows that we have to, you know, stop thinking about Norway as the land of plenty. We need to protect our nature here as well. And these are some recent figures from Statistics Norway showing the prospects in the next decade for land construction and development. And in the municipal plans, around, well, a little less than 3,000 square kilometers have been set aside for construction and development over the next decade. And if we continue the trend from the last decade, probably around 500 and 550 square kilometers will be taken by various kinds of developments. And a lot of this is house construction, recreational cabins, which is increasing a lot in Norway, and also major roads. And there are other types of infrastructure, for example, wind power and power lines that are not included in these figures. And as we can see from the diagram, a lot of forest will be taken and outfields, and also some wetlands and other areas. So we need to think about restoration as important now, and as we can see, the development is continuing. We will continue losing natural areas in Norway, and we need to sort of rethink our balance here. And that brings me to the second point, that it's time to give loss of nature the same attention and resources as fighting climate change. And in Norway, fighting climate change has, of course, been center stage for many, many years, as we've thought of our nature as abundant. But now, from this latest global report, of course, it tells us that climate change or biodiversity and nature conservation is as important as climate change. So just an example here is this big public project called Longship, which is a carbon capture and storage project, has been given around 15 to 20 billion Norwegian kroner of government support. And other climate mitigation measures, for example, from the Klimakur report recently published, it could be around, you know, in the billions of Norwegian kroner annually. So nature protection, even if you have this Hjerkinn project, a large restoration project in Norway that I'm sure will be talked about during this conference, Even that is a relatively large project. We have funding for nature protection and restoration, relatively modest levels compared to climate mitigation. So the second point I want to make here is that it's urgent to change the mindset towards thinking about a cap, a limitation on ecological impacts from land use in the same way as we think about that for greenhouse gas emissions. So if we lose more nature, we have to compensate that. And of course, investing in nature also has these climate benefits as co-benefits. So we have to move towards thinking about a no net ecological loss from land use also in Norway. And of course, as we know in this conference, restoration is an important part to achieve that, together with working more on avoiding some of these impacts, mitigating them. But surely we will also move to focusing on restoration and even offsetting. And in the longer term, probably we will have to move to thinking about net gains as well. Okay, the third point I'm going to make here is similar to the one that Lucy made, but in a Norwegian context. So economic methods can be very useful and I would say crucial to make the case for increasing restoration also in Norway. And just to summarize some of the ways we can use economic methods. The first one, we can use them to assess and value ecosystem service benefits of restoration that Lucy clearly showed in several cases. And monetary values can be very useful and illuminating when it's possible and meaningful to use such methods. Sometimes it's not so meaningful to maybe value biodiversity in economic terms. But other benefits are clearly very useful to monetize when it's possible. And we can also supplement with non-monetary methods. We know that some of these ecosystem services help people's well-being, and we can measure that by using other methods as well. And we have, of course, habitat and resource equivalence methods, where you try to see how you can use restoration to make the nature whole, compensating for something that is lost somewhere else. And we have cost effectiveness analysis, where we look at how you can achieve ecological benefits at the lowest costs. Because as we know, the budgets will always be limited. It always makes sense to get the most ecological benefits out of those funds that we invest. And cost-benefit analysis that also Lucy showed, where we look at both the benefits and the costs of different restoration projects. That is very useful to prioritize projects, which projects will give the highest ecological benefits for the costs. And also how you can balance restoration of efforts with costs and benefits of avoidance and mitigation, and even offsetting. And the final important point is how you can set economic incentives to landowners and developers to encourage them to take these impacts into account. And as Lucy said, there could be payment for ecosystem service schemes, subsidies to farmers or forest owners, or it could be a stick in form of a tax, like we have discussed in Norway. The Green Tax Commission has discussed the possibility of using a nature tax to factor in the full costs of ecological damages from land use. And restoration should also be part of that as a way of perhaps reducing the tax or adjusting to these incentives. And in terms of the use of these economic methods in Norway, probably the same in other countries, is that they are typically used more in terms of assessing avoidance and mitigation efforts, not so much for restoration. But that's changing. And I think in Norway, there is a trend, of course, beginning before this conference, but emphasized also by this conference, that several different restoration efforts now have been analyzed using economic methods, and that has proven very useful. Just going to show a few examples. We had an early example in Norway actually with the chalking of lakes because of the sulfur pollution coming from the UK and their industries. That was in the early 90s, and that was analyzed using cost-benefit analysis to find out what the benefits would be chalking and restoring some of the lake environments. And then recently, nature-based solutions and green infrastructure in cities have been much discussed and analyzed in Oslo and other cities, and also wetlands and invasive species, polluted sediments, and roads. Just two quick examples at the end. We have one project where we worked on nature-based solutions for alleviating floods, and in that case, climate adaptation was the starting point. There was also a very important national assessment of the ecosystem service benefits from wetlands. Much of this work was done in cooperation with NINA. And this work shows that restoring wetlands provide both climate adaptation benefits and substantial ecosystem service co-benefits. I think those economic methods that were used really emphasized the total benefits of these nature-based solutions, not just the adaptation benefits. And it helped justify the society case for these plans that are now underway to restore wetlands in Norway. The second one example is an interesting piece of work or series of works that we've done since 2014, mostly by Kristin Magnussen and many colleagues of ours in NINA and other colleagues. And we've covered different types of species, from mammals to fish to plants. And this particular figure shows a type of analysis where we looked at the costs of controlling different invasive plants compared with utility points that we have assigned the goals for each species. So it's a qualitative measure giving each control measure utility points to show how beneficial each of these, removing each of these species would be. And as you can see from the left to the right, the costs are rising with these blue bars. And if you focus on the species with these Norwegian names to the left, you can see that the costs of controlling them are relatively small, and the benefits are relatively high in terms of these utility points. So it's clear that you should start your investments probably on the left side of this diagram, moving to the right when the costs increase gradually, and there you will get more difficult trade-offs to the right of this figure. Okay, concluding. There is a worrying loss of nature that continues in Norway. So we cannot relax in terms of thinking that we have enough, we have plenty of nature here. That's not the case. We have to be aware of a continued decrease in nature. And not all of these ecological impacts from land use can or should be avoided, of course. Some of them are important for society for other reasons. So we need to think about no ecological net loss. And I think that restoration will be even more important in the next decade, to supplement avoidance and mitigation measures. And I think it's an important point that we should rebalance our efforts. Climate change is, of course, very important. We should continue our efforts there, but we need to raise the stakes on investments in nature, conservation and restoration. And of course, doing both or doing one or the other will also give co-benefits for the other effort. And finally, as Lucy, I think, showed very well, economic methods are very crucial to make the case for restoration and to improve the basis for decisions and prioritization between different projects, and also to create the right incentives so that both farmers, forest owners, and industrial developers and others will have to face the real costs of these projects that they have. So that's the main points I made. I didn't have much time, but I think I just complete thanking you for your attention. Thank you.